we're gonna get into it. And by that, I mean lecture on stuff for a bit. In the class at the moment, we had our second to last set of 3 chapters due. They're due tonight. And then we're doing our last 3 chapters. Woo! I have to warn you that those last 3 chapters are not quite as relevant as the prior chapters. So feel free to summarize and just make that work however it works out for the assignment. I'm not going to be particularly strict on that submission. If it ends up being a little bit less than your typical length, that's okay.
If I write a story instead.
It still has to be relevant. I still have to be able to map it to the outcomes, but yeah, go for it. Yeah. Sorry?
You're gonna pass that on to Hunter?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, he will know that these last 3 chapters, there's just not as much analytical depth that you can go into, I don't think. So don't totally half-ass it, but if it's slightly below the level of your priors, then that's slightly okay.
You know what the topics are off the top of your head?
There's audio, there's publishing mobile games, which we're not going to be doing in the class. So things like, how are you going to use this in the second half of this class? Like, I'm not making a mobile game. So you can see that there's a little bit less to attach yourself to. Try to make it good for what you can attach yourself to and have depth for that. But if there's only 1 or 2 things for you to really say about audio and why audio is important, then great. Having relevant sounds play in your game and not just overlaying your game with the lectures from game dev.
That one guy. Underpowered. The game is about the lectures.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense, but some random platformer, well, the timer is counting down and the timer for you to beat the level is how much time is left in a lecture. Could be a little strange. Anyway, we're going to go through trading systems and cost curves over the first few days, 2 or 3 days of this week. And then we are going to be actively in class analyzing Harmony, coming up with cost curves for the mechanics in that game. As you start to do that and get a sense of what would that balance look like for a balanced version of Harmony, then I will take all of the training wheels off and say, you can do whatever you want to that game now. Just ensure you should be able to know that it stays balanced. So be able to prove that what you produce is still balanced by some cost curve analysis, and we'll go over how to do that in class. But then you can invent new mechanics. You can change the cost of mechanics, cost of any of the mechanics that are in the game. Introduce some, remove some others, but make this game yours. And then the final assignment after this next week's assignment will be a term paper on your experience with Harmony. So just analyzing what you did, how you know it's the logic for why you think it's balanced, and what you would continue to do next time, etc. So I'll get that up so you can work on that soon as we've gone over it. Yeah.
When the grades for the exam will be posted?
Once they are graded. Hunter collected them this morning because after our exam, he was somehow vanished for the weekend already. And I can't go deliver them to him in person because that would probably violate something. All right, so we'll start today by talking about trading systems, and then if we have time, we'll get into cost curves. But to start out, we should figure out why players actually want to trade. So I think we started this, right? We started this slide deck, I believe. We talked about mutually beneficial trades, about how when one lack of a resource from one person leads to a lack of a resource, or when you value one particular resource more than another player, they value some other resource more, then it opens up the ability to trade. You each value the respective resource that you have and your opponent has differently, so you can make a mutually beneficial trade. How do we agree upon trades? We either need to have that embedded within the game's system, there is some kind of trading system. How is it that you find these other players? If it is a digital game and you're all playing the game at the same time, if it's a board game like Catan, then the designers actually have to build in the trading system into the associated rules of the board game. The next question is negotiation supported? I feel like we've said this in class. How far did we get in this? Have we done this, or am I just making that up?
What I did this morning.
Same.
Thinking about to preventing king making.
Oh, yeah, I do remember talking about that. So where was that in here? We talked about trades and gifts. Yeah, we did. We totally went over some of this. Yeah, we totally talked about this.
This looks familiar.
Yeah, there's the preventing king making. So we got to here. So king making was this idea of someone who's about to lose the game can give away their resources in a way that determines who wins. So you are losing, but you have more power than you should as the player because of the associated mechanics, trading mechanics in the game. You're allowed to give away things, right, as you die or lose the game.
Mechanic to me.
So for direct trades, the first thing you might want to consider is trades can be a pretty complex back and forth affair. So any restrictions that you can add about when trading is allowed or how trading is agreed upon makes what is a complex process less complicated. You want to think about, from your player's perspective, how much are they needing to think about at any particular point in time? Are they going to be overwhelmed with the number of options that are available, or especially the level of communication that might be required? So sometimes it's actually just better to disallow trading in the first place. Sometimes the complexity of just trying to make it all work is more complicated than just saying, what does the game look like without trading? So let's give an example. In Monopoly, we're trading properties. Do we allow trading of properties during rolling and moving? So I'm about to land on something, on some property that an opponent has that has a hotel on it, and it's going to nearly wipe me or clean me out. In the middle of this, could I say, I'm going to break your monopoly and I want you to trade me just that one property so that I don't have to do this, but I will trade you another property that is an even better monopoly for you. I will give you a monopoly if you give up your monopoly and don't make me have to land on this right now. And the only reason I'm okay with doing that is because I'm about to land on that because the roll has happened. That would be a free form trading experience where at any point you can just say, pause, let's start trade negotiations. That would lead to a very long risk-like game, I feel like, if everyone at any point in time could just stop the flow, the natural flow of the game and engage in trading negotiations. So sometimes it's better to just disallow trading or to place significant restrictions on when trading is allowed so that you can't just pause the game and make it draw out forever. Trading is really interesting when there's limited information in the game. So what is being traded is unknown, either in general or to players outside of the trade. Think about any game that requires some level of cooperation. Maybe you're trading with someone trying to figure out what they're doing, but they're trading behind your back with another player. Are you being taken advantage of, manipulated? Are you just a pawn in their end game strategy? Now you see that trading is going on, but you don't actually see what resources are changing hands. That can be a very interesting mechanic. The example I have for this is going back to the Monty Hall problem. Who's familiar with Monty Hall? Monty Hall problem? Maybe you know it by the description and not the game or the name. So this is there are 3 doors, you pick a door and decide whether or not you want to swap. There's a prize behind one. And so you pick, the host reveals what is behind one of the doors that you did not pick, and then asks whether you would like to swap, yes or no. So there's limited information as you make a decision about whether to trade or not. You don't know what is behind the associated doors. So you don't know whether this is in your best interest or not. You can do the analysis to figure out why you should trade or not trade, swap or not swap. Let's actually draw out the whole problem because I find it to be fun. And it's only intuitive if you don't know what you're doing.
Long story short, always choose the other door.
Always swap is the right answer, but why?
Statistically speaking, you had a 1/3
So,
chance.
yeah, Monty Hall is this. We
2/3.
have, this is door number 1, this is door number 2, and this is door number 3. So you pick a door. Let's say I'm interested in I pick door number 2, whatever's behind door number 2, I'm going to win. What we know is there is 1 car and there are 2 nothings. Then the host, after you say, I'm picking door number 2, the host will reveal and say something like, there is nothing behind door number 3. Woo! Now, do you want to swap? You actually get the ability to now say, rather than pick 2, I can choose to pick 1 instead. Or do I stick with 2? And some people would incorrectly say that it doesn't matter what you do, the chance is 50-50. And in reality, you still have a 1/3 chance here and you have a 2/3 chance here. Anyone familiar with the why behind this or can explain it in some capacity? Let's go Colin.
So with your initial choice, like you said, you have a 33% chance,
Yeah,
but that's still or if you don't switch, that's still a 33% chance. And so basically, whether you're right or wrong on that is a 33% chance. But you have a 66% chance if you switch of getting it right, because the chances of those other 2 have been combined.
yes. That is absolutely true. The way that I like to visualize this, if I want to make it really obvious, this is only mentally challenging because there are 3 doors. In this modified version of Monty Hall, there are 1 billion doors. This is a very long array of doors that goes on for a very long time. And the prizes, there is 1 car, and there are 999,999,999 nothings. To make this exactly the same decision where we need to choose between 2 doors, what the host is going to do, you're going to pick one of these 1 billion doors, and then the host is going to reveal what is behind 999,999,998 doors, until what is left is one of those doors and the door that you picked. So let's go ahead and simulate this. First of all, who wants to play? Who wants to be the contestant? You won't have a 2/3 chance of winning. You will win this. Who wants to play a game that they are guaranteed to win? Shane wants to play. Great. What door are we picking, Shane?
Okay, let's just choose door number 10 and keep this easy.
All right, so door number 10 is the door that.
I am not choosing 10 million.
All right, so now what I need someone to do is to use a random number generator on Google. Choose something between 1 and 1 billion and keep it to yourself. So who volunteers to do this? Random number between 1 and 1 billion. All right, Ben in the back. So let me know when you have your number between 1 and 1 billion. Make sure it's 1 billion, not 1 million. All right, we have a number. So now we know where the car is. It's whatever he chose. So now as the host, I know that our contestant has chosen door number 10, and in reality, the prize is somewhere. So now I'm going to start eliminating doors, but in order to eliminate doors, I now actually have to know what the number is. So where is the prize? It's 10.
4 million,
It's what, sorry?
74,562,557.
All right, that seems like a pretty random number, right? So if I'm the host, I am now intelligently eliminating all doors except door number 10 and this random door, 74 million, which is actually quite close to the start proportionally. So somewhere in here, there is that door. And now every other door is eliminated. It's a very easy decision now to figure out, do you want to switch? So Shane, would you like to switch from door number 10 to door number 74,562,557?
You know, I think I will.
But drawing it out in an extreme example like that allows you to see why this works so much. The host knows that whatever you pick, there is at least one door that is available here. They're gonna pick whichever door doesn't have the prize behind it, so it doesn't actually give you any information. Just like eliminating arbitrary doors here doesn't actually give you any information. You know that the host will avoid opening the door that has the car behind it, because we need to have a choice after the fact.
So where's this car?
This is why I'm supposed to know what Stu drives. It's that one, right out there. I'm not gonna give you a key, but that one's yours. There you go.
Obviously behind door number 10, duh.
Yeah, right. This is not a 50-50 choice. Anyway, figured I'd go through that for some reason, but limited information can absolutely add to the complexity of a system like this. So there are some random mechanics here, but the fact that something is unknown, as soon as you know where the car is, it's a boring game. But by hiding some information, you can make trades have a lot more interesting effect.
The Monty Hall is fun.
Because whenever someone says it's 50-50, you get to laugh. Another example is Deal or No Deal. If anyone's familiar with the very old show that doesn't get aired anymore and got ruined.
Yeah, Howard Mandel.
But Deal or No Deal is another trading game where the player now needs to make a decision after you eliminate some amounts of money, whether you accept or don't accept an offer for the case that you pick. It's very much like picking a door, except you have something and don't know what its value is. So when someone gives you an offer with that missing information of, it could be one of a bunch of different possible monetary amounts, do you accept a bribe or not? That's going to be based on expected value. That's going to be based on your level of risk tolerance. We talked about how an amount of resource becomes less and less valuable over time. I actually find Deal or No Deal to be a fascinating show to watch because people are silly.
Yeah, when they offer like $32,000 and you're like, sign me up, like I won't go for the big money, but hey, that'll make a
That
difference.
first 32,000 is a lot more valuable than that last 32,000 and $1 million. So there is certainly something that you can learn about how people value money by whether they're willing to take a deal that is significantly below the expected value, knowing that the first bit of money that you get pays off debts, means that you're not accruing interest in the long run, means that there's a lot more going on underneath the hood than just how much money do you accept. With transactions between players, you can also decide whether there is a trading fee or not. So some kind of transaction fee whenever you make a trade, maybe the house takes 0.5%. Maybe if you're trading with the computer in an old RTS like Age of Empires, if you build the trading building, you can trade something like 100 of a resource for 80 of another. There's a 20% cut. So it allows you to say in a vacuum, a trade has to be a particular amount valuable to each player before it is agreed upon. And the more trading fee or transaction fee you have, the higher that fee, the more imbalanced the game state has to be in order for players to agree to a trade. So increasing a trading fee decreases the total amount of trading that happens in the game. So one way to get away from a game where the game is being paused and trading is happening too frequently, rather than disallowing trades, you could just introduce some kind of trading fee and make it less and less worth it to trade. There has to be a massive imbalance. Just talked about that. So trades are overall less profitable. And removes a bunch of trivial trades, very small trades that aren't particularly beneficial to either party, but are still slightly beneficial. If the amount of beneficial doesn't offset the total of the trading fee, now it's not a mutually beneficial trade anymore. So we talked about how fees can be either flat, percentage of the trade's value, or have an associated time cost, which is interesting. Whenever you trade, maybe you lose your ability to do something else on your turn. Maybe there's some time-related cost to trading. Any of those are available as a developer to put in your game to try to make there be the appropriate amount of trading. You don't really want to create just a sandbox and let your players run wild in the sandbox. If there are a number of active trades, so this is more of an MMO style game where you would be able to list anything and everything that you own in some kind of auction house or something else of the sort. If there are a limit to the number of active trades, then that also makes people prioritize either what's going to be most profitable to them or what they have the most of. You have to prioritize what you are trading, because any trade, especially one that might sit in the auction house for a while, is just going to take one of these slots when you could be trading other things and getting value out of that. So it creates a layer of strategy that doesn't exist without limiting. But it also makes it impossible to bot and collect everything and then list that everything all at the same time. You at least have to stagger it, and you can't sell your goods faster than there is demand to acquire them. So in general, adding costs just gives you more control over your game. Questions on any of these mechanics? Not too bad. How about futures? So trading current resources for either future favors or future resources. You can think of this either as investing, or my favorite way to do this is make some low-level friends, shower them with gifts, make them like you. And then when they're powerful players later on, when you're busy in the middle of a quarter, you log in for the first time in weeks, and they say, hey, where have you been? Like, I've been so busy, I can't play, and then they shower you with gifts. I also love doing this in Commander and Magic the Gathering, because in any kind of political system, you can absolutely trade future decisions and say something like, if you don't attack me this turn with your scary board state, I won't attack you for the next 3 turns or 4 turns. And that seems like a good deal from their perspective, maybe. You set it up to the point where now there's some kind of agreement in place. Is there anything in the game rules holding you to that agreement? No, you could absolutely backstab this person and change your mind, but are they likely to agree with you in the future on any future trade? Probably not. They don't think that your word has any value at that point. This gets into game theory, and I could structure an entire course on game theory. Being in any kind of competitive situation and trying to figure out, how do we cooperate, or how do I get what I need to out of another person. You could, of course, also invest currency with a player who is advertising banking services. You see this with very active players or someone who has a very good trading script written. You give them value now, especially knowing that you're going to go AFK for 2 weeks. And they invest your resources that you can then pull it out later for some kind of interest. And of course, we talked about this. How can players break their agreements? How can a developer force players to go through with the agreements? You either need to make rules that force players to stick with their agreements, or you just allow players to break each other's agreements. Usually that's the way we want to go. How valuable is your word? That is something that the game actively tries to test. This leads to the question of, when should the developer get involved? What do we think? What would a game state have to be like for you, the developer, to want to step in and change how player agreements work in a game? Because I think the default is best. Players have full control.
If one guy has control of everything, their player base is starting to decline.
Yeah, you could certainly look at player retention metrics, and if players are not playing your game as much, there could be a reason for that. Dig into it, find out why. Maybe it's worth changing the associated rules of the game. What else? Boils down to recognizing unhealthy situations in your game, I think. So when is it being a distraction from the game? So looking into game theory will help you to understand why players act the way they do in particular situations. I've been really wanting to teach a course on game theory for a while. I thought I might have an opportunity to next year, and it fell apart. But eventually, it's a really interesting field, and especially if you want to understand how people behave in competitive situations. To give you a very brief version of this, who's familiar with the prisoner's dilemma, or has seen or heard of the prisoner's dilemma? Our grad students in Gunner, excellent. So let's actually go through this, because why not? We have a little bit of time to spare. So, all right. Forget the fact that we're in a classroom. There's only two people, you and me. Unfortunately, we just got caught committing a crime together. And the authorities are going to take us and put us in separate rooms and interrogate us separately. They're not interested in getting us to confess ourselves. They're interested in getting us to rat out the other person. So in separate rooms, you will be asked questions about my involvement, and I will be asked questions about your involvement. At the end of this, I have to tell them either, yes, you committed the crime, or no, you did not commit the crime. And vice versa, when they ask the same thing of you, they'll be asking you about me. This leads to 4 possible outcomes. We have player 1 and we have player 2. And this is player 1 saying that player 2 is guilty and player 2 is innocent. Player 2 could say guilty and innocent. Depending on how each of us answer, there is and we know this ahead of time, there is a certain amount of jail time for the both of us that is going to happen. So if we both say that we are guilty, then that is the evidence that they need to put us away for quite some time. So we're each going to get 3 years in prison if we both rat each other out. If I say they didn't do it and you say they didn't do it, then maybe there was some very minor crime that we committed and they caught us doing. So unfortunately, we do both have to spend a year behind bars, but it's better than 3 years behind bars if we both say that we're innocent. On the other hand, if one person rats out the other and not vice versa, the person who didn't rat out gets off scot-free. The person who ratted out gets off scot-free, and the person who got ratted out gets life in prison. Because one person did it, it was way worse. So the guilty and innocent, if one says that 2 is guilty, then 2 spends life in prison, and 1 gets off scot-free. Should be the other way around. 1 is going to get off scot-free. 2 is going to spend life in prison. If 2 says that 1 is guilty, then 1 will spend life in prison, and 2 gets off scot-free. So knowing this particular outcome of distributions of how much time someone spends in jail, and the fact that what the other person is saying is hidden information. What do you do? And again, assume that there's no connection between the two of us. This is just some random person that you got. There's no trying to protect anyone. It's just for your own best interest. What do you want to do?
Not be part of the discussion. First and foremost.
Yeah.
Unless you're working.
I still gotta go to trial, man.
What's funny is there's a right answer.
Rat them out.
Shouldn't you always rat them out then? Because
Why is that?
if they rat you out, it's only 3 years of prison. But if they don't, and you send them to prison, you don't have to do anything.
Right. So the actual system ends up in this state, which is really interesting, and let's find out why. So if everyone plays this in their own best interest, we each get 3 years in prison. Now, if we could somehow agree to cooperate, we could move from this 3-3 to this 1-1, which is, in economic terms, we call a Pareto dominant outcome. It means that no one gets any worse off by moving from here to here. It only gets to be better for some subset of the parties involved. In this case, it happens to be all of the parties involved. But going from here to here, interesting. Could we make that happen? Well, assuming that we were in this position, who wants to change what they did? Well, from this person's perspective, if I go from telling that person 2 was guilty rather than innocent, I go from 1 year in prison to 0 years in prison. That sounds like a pretty good deal. I don't really care about them, so the fact they go from 1 year to life in prison, I got off scot-free, great. From their perspective, they see if I go from saying that person number 1 was guilty rather than innocent, they go from 1 year in prison to 0 years in prison, which seems like a pretty good deal for them. So they want to switch from cooperating to ratting them out. Since both people are choosing to do this, we get back into this guilty situation. And it just comes down to, if I say guilty, it's either 3 or 0. And if I say innocent, it's either 1 or life. And the life becomes 3 and the 1 becomes 0. No matter what I choose, I'm better off having ratted them out. But the same goes for them. No matter what they pick, better having ratted them out. So that leads to a very interesting equilibrium state of 3 years in prison for everyone. Again, interesting, fun, but that is the prisoner's dilemma. So just trying to understand how people work allows you to analyze a situation like this and say something like, they don't have any reason to not rat me out. Since that is the case, I would rather spend 3 years in prison than life in prison. So I will also rat them out. But being able to analyze situations like that is game theory. Questions on anything before we move on? All right. How does gifting work in games from a designer's perspective? So gifting, sure, can be a way to transfer items from one person to another. That is sometimes what's intended, but more frequently, it is actually used as a tool for retention. We see this in free-to-play games. In fact, I think I've talked about it in here, where if you get some good, maybe on a daily basis, it doesn't actually belong to you. It only exists if you gift it to somebody else. That gives you a reason to open the game on a daily basis to claim something to send to others, and also to check and see, has anyone sent me anything from their gifts? And we'll see this in general, if you're making your own games, it's harder to convince people to play it the first time or to come back for a particular play session than it is once they're already playing the game to get them to continue playing the game. Right? This is something psychologically we see in ourselves. Is it harder to convince yourself to do chores, or once you're halfway through doing chores, continuing to do the chores? The same thing applies in a game session. It's harder to convince someone to change what they are doing and open your game or play your game than it is someone who's already has goals and player-driven achievements that they're working toward. They've created the reason to continue playing the game by playing the game. So it doesn't take as much to continue to convince them to play the game. And another thing to note is the more people you know who play a game, the harder it is to not play the game. So all of this is very powerful for recruitment. Thinking about a game in terms of the social network of the players, thinking about it in terms of what reasons do people have to launch the game. Make sure that your players have some reason to keep coming back. One important stat here, cost of new player acquisition is more than $2.50 per player. So thinking about what is the average revenue that you get from a player, if it's not $2.50, you're losing money if you're pouring anything into advertising. How are you supposed to be known? How is your game supposed to be known? How does it gain that initial traction if you don't utilize advertising? You're not some AAA developer that everyone can't wait for the next release of. If you're developing something independently and want to release it, then you are not known.
Shadow Legends.
The way to become known is to spend a lot of money or for your game to gain some natural traction. And it's extremely difficult for games to gain natural traction. You're only familiar with the games that got natural traction. You're not familiar with all of the games that didn't get natural traction. All right, we're going to dive into a few slides on auctions because there are a ton of ways to make auctions work in games. And knowing all of your development tools for auctions helps you to be able to select the best kind of auction for a game. So if we're thinking about auctions in real life, the purpose of a sale as an auction is just to identify who has the highest willingness to pay. However, the question I have for you is, does it maximize the seller's revenue?
That depends.
That's usually a good answer to most questions, but how does it depend? Let's say I have an item that I would like to auction, this blue pen. Would I be maximizing the amount of money that I could get for this blue pen by having an auction for it in this class?
Probably not.
Maybe there's someone willing to pay more for it who is not currently enrolled in this class. Let's break it down even further. Am I maximizing my revenue of being able to sell this pen in this class if I hold an auction? Why?
Wait, you're only going to sell it in this class?
Yes.
So then yes.
The answer is still no, but why? Yeah.
There's no demand for
Well, okay, now I have something much more valuable.
See, I was confused by the wording of the
Yeah.
question. Like, you're only going to sell this in this class. You won't be.
Here would be
going to sell it
a
anywhere
terrible,
else.
ethically gray, ethically black example. A on the next test. Suddenly people, I see that, I see people's attention. But this is now something that only has value in this class, right? Outside of this class, people won't care if they get an A on the next test in this class. Would I be maximizing, if I could only let one person do this, would I be maximizing my revenue by holding an auction for that value? No. The answer is no.
You could sell it to multiple people.
Well, even selling to a single person, let's say I only had one of it. What is the price that we agree to pay in an auction? Is it the highest person's willingness to pay? It's not. What is it?
It's the lowest price of what someone is willing to pay above the maximum price that the second highest.
Yes. Yes, there's only auctioneer, you're only replacing a bid as long as two people are in it. Imagine that someone in here, imagine that some arbitrarily disgustingly wealthy person is in this classroom and also bidding for this. They could offer way more than the next highest person in here could, but to win the auction, they just have to bid a little bit more than what the second highest willingness to pay is, even if they're willing to pay a lot more. So an auction does not maximize the seller's revenue, but it gets you kind of close, usually reasonably close. It gets you to the second highest willingness to pay plus some small amount. Yeah,
There's two really rich people.
then we start having fun.
Yeah.
This is where my ethics start to get gray a little bit. Is it worth being fired from my position for the rest of my career to take this bribe? That's my point, is it starts to get a little bit gray. Could I retire from this one unethical thing? Now there's an actual pro associated with the con of getting caught. Anyway.
I'm unemployed, but I'm filthy rich now.
Right. So slightly more than the second highest player's willingness to pay is the equilibrium for an auction. So just being aware of that already lets you design auctions better. So auctions also have this fun component of there's value, especially in a game, to keeping a particular item away from someone else. Maybe the person with the highest willingness to pay is the wealthiest player who's also closest to winning the game. If I really value keeping that item away from that player, I may put a valuation on that close to what they do, or maybe even more than they do. If there's some way that I can use that to my advantage, now instead of just more losing the game, I can maybe do something about it. So what other design considerations do we have for auctions? We should know, are we emphasizing the buyer's side, the seller's side, or both? You can make a game out of either. If you are someone who goes into a dungeon, farms for some things, and then comes out of the dungeon and holds an auction in town for the items that you found in the dungeon, then you're glorifying the seller's side of an auction. If now the town's store has a limited inventory, and this is the only sword with an upgrade that's going to be in this auction for you, suddenly now you're very intrigued, and this becomes a very narratively driven auction from the buyer's side. You can structure your game around emphasizing different aspects of the auction, especially based on what role the player character is playing in that auction. Are they the seller? Are they the buyer? Is there just natural tension going on? How do you deliver that tension in a way that feels meaningful and powerful to the player? Is haggling allowed during the auction?
Is that even allowed in normal auctions?
No, but you could introduce a game where somebody like, if you drop out of this auction, I will something. That is a way of preventing it from escalating into a bidding war. Maybe if I get you to drop out of the auction, I can get this item at $10,000 under its value. And I say, you know what? I'll split that $10,000 with you. I get the item, but you just get $5,000 and you don't have to do anything except just drop out of this auction. If we get into a bidding war, we're going to end up paying $12,000. And the item's not even worth that. Do we want to support bluffing? Something like, I will just announce to everyone, I have more money than all of you combined. Just don't even get involved. Don't bid for this. It's not worth it. I will steamroll you. Don't make me have to do it. Yeah. So do we want to support bluffing?
How would you support bluffing? Because like if they bluff and somebody calls them on it and they get the item, but they don't have enough money.
Yeah. Well, it just becomes some kind of announcement or something that communication during the auction.
This person's been taken out back and shot.
Yeah. If you really want to support bluffing, just get teachers and or professors in, and they'll have to bluff in order to win anything.
Why bluffing really, help them anyway, because either way, if they're going to, or,
It gives you a chance to win an auction that you otherwise wouldn't be able to win. Someone who bluffs or who has to bluff then is someone who does not have the money to win if this gets to a large point. But if you bluff other people, everyone else out of the auction before it starts, you have a chance of winning it.
I mean, there's no, upside to anyone else for falling for the bluff.
But if they
Sure.
don't have to pay anything, as long as they just keep.
Maybe-
what they're willing to
So
pay.
we'll talk about this in a second, but if there's a cost per bid, or if there is, you can add additional mechanics to the auction that maybe less total money is spent if we can agree on who the winner is going to be before we start. It leads to some really interesting interactions. So the value of items can also be hidden or full information. Especially in a game, we don't really know what the gold cost of some item you've never seen before is. So to what extent do you want to take that away from the player and make them bid for an item without having any idea of what its value is? Or partial information, maybe they have some range, they know that it's valuable, but not that valuable. That can be an interesting wrench. This is similar to like storage wars or whatever else. You're bidding for some hidden repository of goods and you have no idea what it is. But maybe you have a little bit of information. This person has been in default for this long. This person paid for 6 years to store this here before they defaulted on their payment. This now allows you to, there's something very powerful about that gambling aspect of, I don't know what's behind there, but I still want to be able to profit off of it. How frequently can players bid? If you overbid me, can I immediately overbid you? Or does there have to be another party involved? Or maybe it's, if I bid, I can't bid for 30 seconds. So now there's an argument for when is the right time to bid? Because going once, going twice sold is going to happen within 30 seconds. If you put a bid in, what is that like? And again, we're not trying to maximize necessarily the value of the item that gets auctioned. We could just be trying to maximize the fun that is had during this process or the strategic process for this. So making a game mechanic out of when do you bid could be interesting. Is there a maximum bid value? Is there a ceiling to the amount of money that can be spent on a bid? Is there a certain increment that needs to be, do we need to add 5%? Do we need to add 500 flat dollars? This gets down into how long is the auction. If you allow people to continue to bid and overbid each other instantly by 1 penny, how long is this auction going to go on? But from the seller's perspective, if you're interested in squeezing every little bit of value out of your item, then you don't want to place any restrictions on the auction. So that becomes a trade-off that's worth considering. If you have time limits, that creates time pressure. Sometimes when people are pressured, they'll make a decision they otherwise wouldn't have made. You have 5 seconds to figure out whether you're going to bid. 5, 4, 3, people are suddenly, what? I'll do it. I'll do it. I don't care how much it is. I want it. You make a decision that is not in your own best interest because of time pressure. So you could add time pressure to this and attempt to get people to pay more than they otherwise would if they could sit around and think about it for a bit. Concept of reserve pricing. If the auction doesn't get to its reserve value, then it is not sold. That reserve value can either be public or it can be hidden. This is just getting into eBay styles of auctions at this point, but let's say this blue pen is actually worth $5,000. And I'll say, if it doesn't sell for at least $4,500, I am keeping this blue pen. No one is wrenching it away from me.
Feel free.
And then we have buyouts. Just don't even go into the auction if we're willing to pay a buyout price. There are negative auctions where now instead of auctioning something of value, you auction something that is undesirable. And the people who lose the auction deal with the negative consequence, and the person or people who win the auction do not have that negative action applied to them. That can also be a very intriguing mechanic. So we'll come back to more of these mechanics tomorrow. We're somehow out of time already. But we'll talk more about this tomorrow. Any last minute thoughts while people are packing up?
My brain hurts.
What's wrong? It's Monday.
That's why. My engine's been turned off for a while. The cylinders are a bit rusty.
I heard this argument for a longer weekend earlier in this class.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if there was a longer weekend, I would argue for even longer one.
We would have to rename Monday into Moan Day if we did that.
That's.
Should not be an issue. We will be, I think.